My name is Julia, and today I will tell you about a story that has happened to me in the past that has caused me nightmares up to the moment. I had a childhood friend named Amelia. And we have always been close friends, and we often had sleepovers, but only at my house. One weekend my parents had to travel outside the country and they couldn't take me with them or leave me alone at home. I asked Amelia's parents to stay with them for a few days. I noticed a strange hesitation in their eyes, but after a great insistence on my part, they agreed. I stayed over at Emily's place. It was a quaint old house, full of character and charm, but there was something unsettling about the guest room. Every time I walked by, I felt a person or something watching me. I ignored that feeling every time as a product of my imagination. Amelia was warning me not to approach that room, and when I asked her, she told me she didn't know, and that her parents closed the room when she was young and prevented her from approaching or thinking about getting into it. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The room was dimly lit by a single flickering candle, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Every creak of the old floorboards sent shivers down my spine. As the clock struck midnight, I heard faint whispers that seemed to come from the corners of the room. I couldn't make out the words, but they were filled with despair. Panic set in as the room grew colder and colder, and my breath became visible in the chilly air. Then, a figure appeared at the foot of her bed, a spectral silhouette swathed in darkness. It reached out its bony, cold hand, and my heart raced. I wanted to scream but couldn't find my voice. The figure drew closer, its icy grip tightening around her ankle. Just as I felt myself being dragged towards the edge of the bed, Emily burst into the room, switching on the lights. The ghostly figure vanished, leaving me trembling with fear. Emily had sensed something was wrong and rushed to her aid. When I started getting my nerve back, the first thing I noticed was that I wasn't sleeping in my room. I was in a room where I couldn't figure out or see how I got there. That's when I heard Amelia's parents say, standing in front of the door, and on their faces, signs of horror and amazement, how I walked into the guest room. That night ended well, and nothing like it happened in the following days, and when I told my parents about what happened, they told me that it was the thrill of my imagination and that it was just a nightmare. And for my friend, Amelia's and her parents, it wasn't long before they moved out of town, and I don't know where they left, and we haven't communicated since. This experience left me with many questions and nightmares. The abandoned mansion. My name is Mark. I want to share my story with you, and I hope my experience will be useful for any of you. I had a childhood friend named Tom. Tom had always lived in the shadow of his family's sprawling, abandoned mansion. The rumors in their small town were that the house was haunted, but Tom insisted it was just superstition. He invited me to stay over for the weekend to prove it. As night fell, the mansion seemed to come alive with strange sounds. Creaking floors, rattling windows, and distant whispers echoed through the empty hallways. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched by unseen eyes. Around midnight, I heard the faintest music, as if a distant piano was playing a haunting melody. I followed the sound, finding myself in a dusty old ballroom. The room was dimly lit by a flickering chandelier, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Suddenly, I noticed a figure in an old-fashioned ball gown, dancing alone in the center of the room. Hess' face was obscured by a porcelain mask, and Hess' movements were both graceful and otherworldly. My heart pounded as he realized that the ghostly figure was Tom's long-dead great-grandfather, who had been a renowned dancer in Hess' time. Unable to tear my eyes away, I watched in horror as the spectral dancer's movements grew faster and more frantic. Hess' once elegant waltz devolved into a frenzied, macabre dance. The room grew colder, and my breath turned visible. Terrified, I stumbled backward and fled the mansion, leaving Tom behind. When he finally found his voice, I tried to warn Tom, but it was too late. Tom was never the same after that night, forever haunted by the ghostly dance of his ancestors. The cabin in the woods. My name is Amy. I want to share my daughter Sarah's story with you. I hope her experience is a useful lesson for any of you. Sarah and her friends decided to spend a weekend at a remote cabin in the woods. They were looking forward to a peaceful getaway, but as night fell, the atmosphere grew increasingly unsettling. As Sarah settled into her sleeping bag, she heard faint, eerie whispers coming from the surrounding trees. She dismissed them as her imagination playing tricks on her. But when the whispers grew louder and closer, panic set in. One by one, Sarah's friends began to wake, their faces pale with terror. The cabin's windows rattled, and the walls seemed to pulse with a sinister energy. Then, they heard the rhythmic tapping of long, bony fingers against the cabin walls, as if something was trying to get in. Sarah grabbed a flashlight and ventured outside, determined to confront whatever was tormenting them. In the moonlight, She saw a circle of shadowy figures surrounding the cabin. Their eyes gleamed with malevolence, and their distorted faces contorted with rage. Sarah's friends rushed to join her, but it was too late. The figures closed in, their unearthly forms becoming more distinct. They were the spirits of long-forgotten settlers who had perished in these woods, and they sought revenge on those who dared to intrude upon their territory. As the spirits closed in on them, Sarah and her friends screamed in terror, realizing they had unwittingly entered a nightmare. Trapped in the cabin in the woods, they had become characters in a horror story of their own, with no way to escape the vengeful spirits that surrounded them. Until Sarah notices that those ghostly shadows that surround them cannot or avoid entering the cottage. Gathered together in the middle of the living room, they shook with fear, waiting for the morning.